Hi guys, it's Dylan from Bijou Diamond Jewellery in London with another watch video, and today we're taking a look at the brand new release this year, Rolex GMT-Master II Batman with the Jubilee bracelet. So as with all my reviews, let's go back in time and look at the history of this watch. So if we go back to the 1930s, 1940s, air travel was becoming increasingly popular as a mode of transport. Aircraft were able to fly longer with more people on board, and by the 1940s and 50s, aircraft were able to cross continents, cross time zones, and as a result of this, pilots were constantly crossing through time zones and having to adjust their watch manually to account for that, and change the time manually on their watch. So in the 1950s, early 1950s, Pan Am contacted Rolex and said, can you create a watch for our pilots that allows them to quickly and easily change the time zone of their watch? So 1 year after Rolex released the Submariner in 1953, in 1954 Rolex released the GMT Master, which featured the same case, or very, very similar case to the Submariner, a very similar look in fact to the Submariner. And it featured a bezel with 24-hour markings on it and a 24-hour hand as well. So it meant the bezel could be rotated, same way that the Submariner bezel could be rotated, but this GMT Master bezel was bidirectional, so which means it could be twisted in either direction, making it easier for them to change between time zones. And the 24-hour hand basically pointed always at the time of GMT, so the standard GMT time. And obviously that first reference, 6542, featured a different movement to the Submariner to be able to power the date function and also the 24-hour hand. So we're going to skip quite a few years on now because it's just easier to skip through that time of history. A few different things changed to the GMT Master over those years, but we're going to skip to 2005 when Rolex released the first modern day reference that we see now, which was the 116718LN, which is a full yellow gold GMT Master. It featured a much larger case size, completely different look, much more in line with our modern day style of watches now. And that model was only just discontinued, but other models were released after that one. The initial for that size of case was only in yellow gold. Then later in 2007 we saw the release of the steel variations, and then relevant to this one that we're looking at today, in 2013 Rolex released the 116710 BLNR, aka the Batman. That was different to this one because it featured an oyster bracelet, and this model is now discontinued and replaced by the one that we're looking at today. But that was the first model in 2013, that was the first model to feature a two-tone bezel in ceramic, and it's extremely hard to fuse those two colors seamlessly the way that Rolex has done it. So it was a real amazing feat in engineering for them to be able to create that. And then skip a few years on to this year, 2019, only a couple months ago, end of March, when Rolex released this one that we're looking at today, which is the 126710 BLNR. Okay, so that concludes the history of the GMT Master. It's a very basic history. I've done some other videos with slightly more in-depth history, but we're going to jump straight into the features of this brand new release from this year. So we're going to start, as always, with the clasp on this watch. This watch features the standard oyster clasp, a really nice clasp, very solid, very well machined, extremely resilient to everyday wear and tear. Yeah, a very, very solid clasp. One of my favorites in the industry, just a brilliant everyday wearer. This one obviously features a polished center part to the clasp, and then the outsides are brushed. Really nice little accent to have that polished going through the center of the clasp, adds to the whole sort of dressier look that this watch features versus the Submariner. This one does feature the Easy Link adjustment, so it's a 5mm extension inside the bracelet, and that basically means that you can adjust it and make it a little bit larger when your wrist expands in warmer weather. It's obviously not quite as adjustable as a Submariner glide lock bracelet, or clasp, sorry, but either way, brilliant little feature to have on your watch. Now moving on to the bracelet, and that's going to be the biggest, most important bit and change in this year's Batman, and that is the new Jubilee bracelet. We saw it first feature on the Pepsi last year at 2018 from Basel, and that was really well received. This one looks really great on the Batman. It wasn't something I'd seen coming, though. I didn't really predict that Rolex would put it on the Batman and discontinue the old one. But yeah, it looks really nice. It is a real iconic bracelet from Rolex. One of their most famous looks to a Rolex is a Jubilee bracelet. And in fact, some of the original GMT Masters, like the 6542 reference from the 1950s, some of those original watches actually featured the Jubilee bracelet as a way to kind of separate the Submariner and the GMT Master watches from one another, because otherwise they look quite similar. So that was a nice way for them to change the look and make it look a little bit more unique, or each line to look more unique. The bracelet works really well on this case. I think it looks really, really cool. Now moving up to the case on this watch, a very, very similar case to a Submariner, just slightly, a couple real small changes in terms of depth and the overall size, but overall really similar. The biggest difference you'll really notice is on our bezel here. Obviously this features a 24-hour bezel, so showing different markers for 24 hours, and it's also bidirectional, so it can rotate in 2 directions, versus Submariner, which is unidirectional and features like a 60-minute countdown elapsed time for a dive. Really cool black and blue bezel on this watch, where it gets its name, the Batman, from being black and blue, which is kind of Batman colors, and also the dark night, the night, and the black and the blue kind of reminds you of the night. And like I mentioned before, a really important step for Rolex in history when they fused these 2 colors of ceramic, which they call Cerachrome, for their bezel, which is quite a difficult thing to do, but it's seamlessly done and it looks really, really cool. And then moving on to the dial, we've got a very, very simple dial, kind of maxi style markers. We've got our blue hand, our blue 24-hour hand to match our blue bottom half of our bezel. A really nice little accent there. Everything ties in really nicely. We've obviously got a black dial, again tying into the black half of the bezel as well. Yeah, very smart watch, very understated in terms of those colors, and it's just a nice little addition to have that warmth of the blue on the dial. There's not really many changes on this watch versus the previous Batman, the obviously most notable being the Jubilee bracelet. Another one is a change in the arrangement of print at 6 o'clock on the dial is slightly different, just so you can distinguish between people putting Jubilee bracelets on the old Batman. So yeah, real subtle changes, but I'm sure it'll be very popular. We've already had considerable interest in this watch. Okay, let's briefly have a look at how to set the GMT function on this watch, and actually how to read different time zones on the watch. So we're going to first adjust our 24-hour hand. I'm going to set that to GMT time, which is at the moment 10 a.m. So once you've set your GMT time, you can find that information out on the internet, what the GMT time is for that time of day that you're setting your watch. Then you just need to set your actual hour, so your local time hour hand. So now we're going to adjust, so push the crown in 1 stop, and we're going to adjust the time now to our local time, which is 11 a.m. Right, so that's set our actual times on the watch. Now we can now use our bezel. So we're going to put this into practice now and use New York as an example. So New York is actually at the moment 4 hours behind GMT, so Greenwich Mean Time. So in order for us to read the time in New York with this watch, we need to rotate our bezel clockwise 4 positions on the bezel. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and now we read off the bezel 6 a.m. in New York. So the time now is 6 a.m. in New York. Now if we look for, we reset the bezel again back to 12 o'clock, and we check the time now for Japan, which is 9 hours plus GMT. We then rotate our bezel 9 positions anti-clockwise, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And that reads 7 o'clock in Japan. So really easy way to read your watch. And at the same time being able to still read the time at home, your home time using that hour hand. Yes, it is a feature that you could just work out with mental maths, basic adding and subtracting of hours, but this is a much easier way, visual way. For those that prefer visual ways of reading time, then this is a much easier way. For me personally, I find this a lot easier than adding and subtracting. Yes, it's not complicated maths, but it's just easier to have a quick look at your watch. Another thing that people often say about this feature, about how it's overrated, is you can just look at your phone and see the world clock on your iPhone. Yes, of course you can do that, but that kind of defeats the object of having a watch anyway. Otherwise, just look at your phone the whole time. It's a very basic complication, but for those that travel a lot for work or do lots of international phone calls, perhaps your office is based in London, but you always deal with New York, this is a really easy little thing for you just to quickly have a quick glance and work out whether it's an appropriate time to call or not. So there are plenty of people, we have plenty of clients that own the GMT Masters and also GMTs from other brands that really enjoy using the feature. So overall, would I own this watch? Probably I wouldn't own this one. I'd probably own the old bat mount on the Oyster bracelet. Personally, I prefer the Oyster bracelet, but I can definitely appreciate the Jubilee. The only reason why I say that is because I find the Jubilee bracelet is quite loud, a little bit blingy in some ways. That's definitely arguable. That's, depends on your taste and your style. But for me, this is quite like jewelry, is quite showy. You definitely can see it and notice it much more so than a standard Oyster bracelet. Overall, a really nice watch, and it was incredibly well received when it was released this year. A lot of people really loved the look of this watch, and I can definitely understand why. It's a really nice looking piece. Definitely my favorite thing about this now that Rolex has done with the GMT line for the steel watches is that they've really made an effort to separate them from the Submariners. And no longer are clients trying to decide really between a really similar looking black Submariner and a black GMT Master. There's real obvious differences between the two watches, and I think that's a really good move from Rolex. Overall, a fantastic watch. The Jubilee is a brilliant addition to this watch, makes it much more dressier, a little bit more smarter versus the old one, and perhaps arguably more versatile. A fantastic watch that you will not be disappointed with, and probably a really brilliant investment piece as well. So thanks guys for watching. Let us know in the comments if you like this watch, which version of this would you buy, the old one or the new one. Perhaps I'll do a video in the near future comparing the old one and the new one. Let us know in the comments if you'd buy this or the Pepsi as well. And yeah, let us know what other watches you want us to review. Thanks for watching, and as always, if you're interested in this watch or any other watch in the Rolex collection, then don't hesitate to contact us. Our details are in the description, and also at the end of the video, we'd be happy to call this watch into stock for you.